I noticed my daughter-in-law's smile before I heard her words. It was too calm, too rehearsed. "Now that your husband is dead," she said, setting her fork down with deliberate care, "pack your bags and leave." My son didn't look at me. He just nodded. I didn't say anything. I stood up, folded my napkin, and walked out of the dining room. The next morning, I went to the bank. "I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end and tell me where you're watching from. I'd like to know how far this story travels." The dining room still smelled like roasted chicken and rosemary when I passed it again that night. I hadn't touched my plate at 71. You learn how to move quietly through your own home, especially when it no longer feels like yours. The house was largette stories, wide windows, the kind of place my husband Noel used to call our forever home. He had loved that phrase. Said it like a promise. Now it echoed like a lie. I walked upstairs slowly, one hand trailing along the banister, polished by decades of use. My footsteps were soft, but the silence of the house made them sound louder than they were too loud, like I was a guest who had overstayed. It had only been 7 days since we buried Noel. 7 days since I stood beside a polished mahogany casket, holding back tears because my son didn't like scenes. 7 days since neighbors brought casseroles and spoke in hushed voices about what a wonderful man he was. 7 days since I still believed I had a place in this family. My bedroom door creaked as I pushed it open. Our bedroom. I paused at the threshold. His slippers were still by the bed. His watch still rested on the nightstand. A book lay open, face down, as if he might come back and finish it. I didn't cry. Not then. Grief had settled into me like cold air, quiet, heavy, always there, not loud enough to break, just enough to remind me I was alone. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my hands. They looked older than I remembered. Downstairs, I could hear faint voices. My son, Wade, and his wife, they weren't whispering. They weren't trying to. "She needs to be out in 2 weeks." Romy said, her voice sharp, efficient, like she was discussing renovations. "We'll need time to repaint. And the kitchen, God, that kitchen is outdated." Wade sighed. "We'll handle it. No hesitation, no mention of me, just logistics." I closed my eyes. There was a time when Wade used to run into this very room after nightmares, climbing into bed between Noel and me. "Mom, I had a bad dream." I would stroke his hair until he fell asleep again. Back then, I was home. Now, I was an inconvenience. I stood up and opened the closet. My clothes hung neatly, arranged by color the way Noel liked. "Everything in its place," he used to say with a small smile. I reached for a suitcase. It felt heavier than it should have, not because of the weight, but because of what it meant. I packed, slowly, not everything, just the essentials. A few dresses, some photographs, the jewelry Noel had given me over the years. I left the rest. If they wanted the house, they could have the furniture, the dishes, the memories soaked into the walls. I wasn't going to fight for things that no longer felt like mine. Around midnight, I walked downstairs one last time. The house was quiet now, lights off, doors closed. I stood in the living room, looking at the couch where Noel used to sit every evening, watching the news and pretending not to fall asleep halfway through. I almost smiled. Almost. Then I noticed something. A folder on the coffee table. Not mine. I stepped closer. It was open carelessly. Inside were printed documents, property listings, renovation estimates, and at the top, a heading, post-occupancy plan. I didn't need to read further. They had already decided. I was just the last to know. I closed the folder gently and placed it exactly where I found it. Then I turned off the last light and went back upstairs. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar silence. Noel used to breathe softly beside me. Now there was nothing. Just space. Just absence. Just the faint hum of a house that was no longer mine. At 6:30 a.m., I got up. I dressed carefully. Not in morning black, but in something simple, neat, respectable. Noel always said, "No matter what happens, you carry yourself with dignity." I intended to. I carried my small suitcase downstairs. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. The front door opened easily. The morning air was cool, fresh, indifferent. I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and didn't look back. 15 minutes later, I was sitting in my car, hands on the steering wheel, breathing slowly, steady. Then I started the engine and drove straight to the bank. Because if there was one thing Noel had always told me quietly, firmly, it was this: always know what's yours. And for the first time in a long time, I was about to find out. The bank smelled exactly the same as it always had: clean, quiet, slightly cold. It was strange how some places never change, even when everything else in your life does. I sat in the parking lot for a few minutes before going in, my hands resting in my lap, still holding on to the steering wheel out of habit. The engine had been off for a while, but I hadn't moved. Not because I was unsure, just adjusting. After 32 years of letting my husband handle everything financial, stepping into that role felt unfamiliar, not frightening, just distant, like putting on someone else's coat and realizing it fits, but you've never worn it before. I picked up my purse, checked the envelope of documents I had, bro-told statements, a copy of our marriage certificate, things I thought might matter, and stepped out of the car. Inside, the morning crowd was light. A young teller greeted me with a polite smile. "Good morning, ma'am." I nodded. "I'd like to speak with someone about my accounts." My voice sounded steady. That surprised me. A few minutes later, I was sitting across from a woman in her early 50s. Her nameplate read Helen Carter, branch manager. She had the kind of expression people wear when they already know something about you. "I'm very sorry for your loss, Mrs. Henderson," she said gently. I inclined my head. "Thank you." There was a pause. Not uncomfortable, just respectful. Then I placed the documents on her desk. "My husband handled all of our finances." I said, "I need to understand where I stand." Helen nodded and turned to her computer. The sound of her typing filled the room. Soft, rhythmic. I watched her face more than the screen. At first, nothing changed. Then something did. A slight shift in her expression. Not concern, not confusion. Surprise. "Is there a problem?" I asked. She glanced at me, then back at the screen. "No, not a problem," she said slowly. "Just more than I expected." More than expected. I didn't respond. I just waited. She printed a few pages and slid them toward me. "Let's start with your joint checking account," she said. The numbers were familiar, modest, manageable. Enough to live on for a while if I was careful. I nodded. That sounds right. She printed another sheet. "This is a savings account in both your names." The balance was larger. Not shocking. Noelle had always been careful. Still, I felt something shift in my chest. A quiet relief. Then, Helen paused again. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. "Mrs. Henderson," she said, "when was the last time you reviewed your full financial profile with your husband?" I gave a small, almost apologetic smile. "I didn't," I said. "He preferred to handle those things." She nodded, as if that confirmed something. "I see. More typing, more pages." Then she turned the screen slightly toward herself, studying it more closely. "There are additional accounts," she said. I didn't move. "How many?" I asked. Her eyes flicked toward me briefly. "4," she said. "2 certificates of deposit, a money market account, and a trust account." The word trust lingered in the air. I felt it settle somewhere deep inside me. "I wasn't aware of any trust," I said. Her voice softened slightly. "They are all listed under your name, Mrs. Henderson." For a moment, I didn't understand. "Not fully my name?" I repeated. "Yes." She reached into a drawer and pulled out a file. Inside were documents, signatures, dates. She placed one in front of me. I leaned forward. There it was. My signature, clear, undeniable. But I didn't remember signing it. "I don't recall this," I said quietly. Helen nodded, not surprised. "It's quite common," she explained. "Sometimes one spouse handles the details and presents documents during routine visits. Insurance updates, account changes." I thought back, moments that had seemed insignificant at the time. Signing papers without reading too closely. Trusting. "They're all valid," she continued. "And they all name you as the primary holder. Primary holder. Not beneficiary. Not secondary. Primary." I sat back slowly in my chair. The room felt the same, but I didn't. Helen gathered the statements and organized them neatly. "These accounts have been active for several years," she said. "Regular deposits. Conservative growth." I glanced at the numbers again. They weren't just savings. They were security, independence. "There's one more detail," she added. Her tone had changed slightly. Careful, measured. "The trust account," she said, "has been receiving transfers from a business account." I looked up. "My husband sold his business when he retired." I said, "That's what I was told." Helen hesitated, then shook her head gently. "According to our records," she said, "the business account is still active." Something inside me went very still. Not shocked, not yet, just alert. "There have been consistent deposits," she continued, "and corresponding transfers into your trust." I didn't speak. I just listened. For years, I had believed what I was told, that the business was gone, that the money had been used, that everything was simple. It wasn't. I looked down at the papers in front of me, then back at Helen. What do I need to do next? I asked. She held my gaze for a moment, then answered clearly. I recommend you speak with an attorney, she said, someone who can walk you through your rights and access your rights. I gathered the documents slowly, placing them back into my envelope with careful hands. Nothing rushed, nothing careless. When I stood up, Helen added one more thing. Mrs. Henderson, she said, your husband was very thorough. I paused. Yes, I said quietly. He always was. Outside, the sunlight felt brighter than before, or maybe I was just seeing it differently. I got into my car and sat there for a moment. The envelope rested on my lap, heavier than when I arrived. Not because of the paper, but because of what it meant. They told me to leave. Said I had nothing. Said I didn't belong. I looked down at the documents one more time, then closed the envelope. And for the first time since that dinner, I didn't feel like I was the one being pushed out. I felt like I was the one holding something they didn't even know existed. I didn't drive home right away. Instead, I pulled into a small cafe, just 2 blocks from the bank. It was the kind of place Noelle and I used to visit on Sunday mornings. Nothing fancy, just warm coffee and quiet conversation. I hadn't been back there since he passed. I sat in the car for a moment, looking at the entrance. Then I picked up the envelope and walked inside. The bell above the door chimed softly. No one looked up. That was fine. I ordered a coffee. Black, the way Noelle used to drink it, even though I'd never liked it that way. Then I took a seat by the window, placing the envelope carefully on the table in front of me. I didn't open it right away. I just sat there, watching people pass by, thinking, for 32 years, my life had been simple in a quiet way. Not easy, but structured. Noelle handled the finances. I handled the home. He made the big decisions. I made everything around them work. It wasn't submission. It was trust. I wrapped my hands around the cup, letting the heat settle into my fingers. Then I opened the envelope. The papers inside were neatly organized. Balances, account numbers, statements, everything clear, everything real. I started with the savings account again, then the CDs, then the money market. Each number was larger than the last. Not extravagant, but steady, carefully built. That was Noelle. He never believed in sudden wealth, only in quiet preparation. Then I reached the trust documents. The paper felt different, heavier, more deliberate. I unfolded them slowly. The language was formal, legal, precise. I didn't rush. I read every line. At first, it was difficult to follow, but certain words stood out. Primary, holder, full control, discretionary authority. I paused. Read that part again. Full control. Not shared, not conditional, mine. I leaned back slightly in my chair. The cafe noise faded into the background. For the past week, I had been treated like someone who needed to be managed, moved, replaced. But these documents, they told a different story. I kept reading. There were references to assets tied to Noelle's former business. Transfers, allocations, protections. That word stayed with me. Noel hadn't just saved money. He had planned. Quietly, carefully, without ever explaining it fully. I thought back to the last few years. The small things I hadn't questioned at the time. The way he insisted on going to the bank alone. The way he would sometimes ask casual questions about Wade's spending. The long pauses when our son talked about tight finances. At the time, I thought he was just being cautious. Now, it felt like something else. I turned to another page. More transfers. Regular, consistent, small amounts at a time. Not enough to attract attention, but over years, they had grown into something substantial. I closed my eyes for a moment, not overwhelmed, not emotional, just aware. While Wade and Romy were planning renovations, measuring rooms, talking about making the space their own, they had no idea what actually sat in my name. I opened my eyes and looked out the window. A couple walked past, laughing. A dog pulled gently on its leash. Life moved forward. Simple, unaware. I picked up my coffee and took a sip. It was too bitter. I set it back down. Then I reached for my phone. I didn't call Wade. I didn't call anyone from the house. Instead, I searched for a name I hadn't used in years. Daniel Brooks, Noel's attorney. My thumb hovered over the number. Then I pressed call. It rang twice. Daniel Brooks. A calm voice answered. Daniel, I said. This is Margaret Henderson. There was a brief pause. Then recognition. Margaret? He said. I was wondering when you might call. I didn't react to that. I just left the bank. I said, I have some documents I don't fully understand. His tone shifted slightly, more focused. I can imagine, he said. Are you available this afternoon? I looked down at the papers again, at the words, at the signatures, at everything Noel had quietly put in place. Yes, I said. Bring everything, Daniel replied. There are things we should go over in person. I ended the call and placed the phone back on the table. For a moment, I just sat there, still. A week ago, I thought I had lost everything. My husband, my home, my place in my own family. Now, I wasn't so sure. I gathered the documents and placed them back into the envelope, carefully, precisely. Outside, the sunlight hadn't changed, but something inside me had. They told me to pack my bags, told me to leave. I stood up, picked up my purse, and walked toward the door. Because the truth was, I wasn't the one being pushed out. I was the one they had underestimated. Daniel's office was exactly where I remembered it. Top floor, quiet building, dark wood doors and soft carpet that muted every step. Nothing flashy. Noel had always trusted people like that man who didn't need to prove their success out loud. I arrived 10 minutes early. Old habits. The receptionist recognized my name the moment I spoke it. Mrs. Henderson, she said gently, standing up. Mr. Brooks is expecting you. Of course he was. His office door was already open when I approached. Daniel stood as I entered, his expression calm, but there was something else behind it. Not surprise, not sympathy, recognition. Margaret, he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Please. I sat down, placing the envelope carefully in front of me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I slid the documents toward him. "I went to the bank this morning," I said. "They told me there are accounts I didn't know about." Daniel nodded once, like he had been waiting to hear that exact sentence. "Yes," he said. "I assumed that's why you called. No hesitation, no confusion." I watched him closely. "You knew?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened the envelope, taking out the documents one by one, scanning them quickly, professional, methodical. "Your husband was a very thorough man," he said finally. "I've heard that today." That earned the smallest hint of a smile. Then it was gone. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair. "What do you understand so far?" he asked. I chose my words carefully. That there are accounts in my name. I said that I have control over them, and that there is a trust connected to Noel's business. He nodded again. "That's correct. Simple. Direct. But I don't understand why." I said. That was the part that stayed with me. Not the money, not the accounts, the reason. Daniel folded his hands on the desk. "For protection," he said. The word landed the same way it had at the bank. Heavy. Deliberate. "Protection from what?" I asked. This time, he looked at me directly. "From the possibility that one day you might need to stand on your own." I didn't move, didn't react, but something inside me tightened. Noel was not a man who acted impulsively. Daniel continued. Everything he set up was done over time, quietly, carefully. I thought about the past few years again, the small conversations, the pauses, the way Noel would listen more than he spoke when Wade visited. He saw something. I said, Daniel didn't confirm it, but he didn't deny it either. He wanted to make sure that whatever happened, Daniel said, you would never be dependent on anyone else's decisions. Dependent. I let that word settle. Then I asked the question that mattered. What exactly do I have control over? Daniel reached for a different set of documents in the file. Not the ones I brought. Ones he already had prepared. He turned them toward me. The trust, he said, is not just a saving structure. It holds multiple assets tied to Noel's former business. Former? I noticed that word. According to the records I reviewed this morning. I said, the business account is still active. Daniel's expression didn't change. Noel never fully liquidated the company. He said he restructured it. Restructured. He retained certain income streams, Daniel continued, and directed a portion of those into the trust in your name. For a moment, the room felt very still. So when Wade told me the business was gone, I said, Daniel finished the sentence calmly. That was not accurate. Not accurate. I nodded once, slowly. And access? I asked, who has access to these accounts? Daniel didn't hesitate. You do. Just 2 words. Clear and final. No one else, I asked. No one else, he confirmed. I looked down at the papers in front of me, then back at him. And if someone tried, I asked, to access or control them without your authorization, he clarified. I nodded. They would be denied, Daniel said. Immediately, a pause, and legally, he added. You would have full grounds to challenge any attempt. Challenge. I leaned back slightly in my chair. Not overwhelmed, not emotional, just seeing things more clearly. For the past week, I had been treated like someone who needed to be moved out of the way, managed, replaced. But legally, Financially, structurally, I wasn't in the position they thought I was, Daniel. I said, if I do nothing, what happens? He considered that for a moment. Then everything remains as it is, he said. The assets stay under your control. The trust continues to operate as designed. And if I decide to act, that question shifted something, just slightly. Daniel leaned forward, not aggressively, just engaged. Then you have options, he said. Options. You can restrict access further, he continued. You can restructure ownership. You can decide who benefits and who doesn't. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I thought about the dinner, about Romy's voice, about Wade sitting there, not looking at me. Pack your bags and leave. I looked back at Daniel. What would you recommend? I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Good. That meant he was thinking. I would recommend, he said carefully, that you take your time, understand everything fully, and decide from a position of clarity, not reaction. Not reaction. I nodded. That sounded like Noel. I gathered the documents slowly, placing them back into the envelope. When I stood up, Daniel added one more thing. Margaret, he said. I paused. They may not realize it yet, he said, but the situation is not what they think it is. I met his gaze. I'm starting to understand that. I said, outside, the hallway felt quieter than before. Or maybe I was just listening differently. As I walked toward the elevator, I didn't feel rushed. I didn't feel lost. For the first time since that dinner, I felt something else. Not anger, not even satisfaction, control. And I hadn't even used it yet. I didn't go back to the house that afternoon, not immediately. Instead, I drove aimlessly for a while, letting the roads I had known for decades carry me without thinking, past the grocery store where I used to shop every Thursday, past the park where Wade learned how to ride a bike, past the church where we said goodbye to Noel just days ago. Everything looked the same. That was the unsettling part. Nothing in the world had changed, only the way I saw it. By the time I finally pulled into the driveway, the sun was already beginning to lower. The house stood exactly as I had left it. Quiet. Still. I sat in the car for a moment, my hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. 5 days ago, I would have stepped out, with hesitation, with uncertainty, with that quiet feeling of not belonging. Now, I simply opened the door and walked in. The air inside felt different, not warmer, not colder, just clearer. I placed my purse on the entry table and set the envelope beside it. I didn't hide it. I didn't lock it away. I just left it there, from the kitchen. I could hear voices again. Wade and Romy. They'll need to start the work soon, Romy was saying. If we delay, the contractor's going to push us back another month. Wade sighed. We'll handle it. She's leaving anyway. She, not Mom, not Margaret. I walked into the kitchen. They both turned. For a split second, there was something in Wade's eyes. Surprise. You're back, he said. I nodded once. Yes. Romy crossed her arms, leaning lightly against the counter. Her expression didn't change. Still composed, still certain. Have you started packing? She asked. No greeting? No pause. I have. I said. That seemed to satisfy her. She nodded slightly. Good, she said. We really need the space cleared out soon. I looked at her for a moment. Not long, just enough. Then I shifted my gaze to Wade. He still wouldn't meet my eyes. I'll be out of your way, I said calmly. That seemed to relax him. His shoulders dropped just a fraction. Mom, it's just practical, he said. The house is too much for you now. Practical. I didn't argue. I didn't correct him. I understand, I said. And I did. Just not in the way he thought. I turned and walked upstairs. The bedroom looked exactly the same. Unchanged. Frozen. I opened the closet again and added a few more things to my suitcase. Not everything. Still not everything. Because now I understood something I hadn't before. I wasn't the one losing this house. They just believed I was. I closed the suitcase and sat on the edge of the bed for a moment. I allowed myself to look around. Really look. The framed photos. The curtains Noel had insisted on choosing himself. The small scratch on the dresser from when Wade was 10 and thought it was a good idea to build a fort indoors. Memories. Everywhere. And yet, none of them felt like leverage. I wasn't going to fight for walls. I stood up, picked up the suitcase, and walked back downstairs. Romy and Wade were still in the kitchen, talking quietly. They stopped when they saw me. I'll be staying somewhere else for a few days, I said. Wade frowned slightly. Where? I'll manage, I replied. Romy didn't ask anything else. She didn't need to. As far as she was concerned, this was already done. I reached for my purse, then paused. The envelope was still on the table. For a moment, I considered leaving it there, letting them see it, wonder about it. But no, not yet. I picked it up calmly and placed it back into my bag. Timing mattered. I'll let you know when everything is arranged, I said. Wade nodded. Okay, that was all. No apology, no hesitation. I walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped outside. This time, I didn't look back. Not at the house, not at the life I had built there, because something had shifted. Before, I was leaving because they told me to. Now, I was leaving because I chose to. And that difference mattered more than they would ever understand. As I placed my suitcase in the trunk, my phone buzzed. A message from Wade. Make sure you don't take anything that belongs to the house. I stared at the screen for a moment. Then I locked the phone and set it aside. They still thought this was about furniture, about rooms, about space. They had no idea. I got into the car and started the engine. There was one more thing I needed to do. Not tomorrow, not next week, soon, but not yet. For now, I would let them keep believing they had already won. I checked into a small hotel just outside town. Nothing special. Clean bed, neutral walls, a window facing a parking lot, the kind of place people pass through without leaving a trace. I placed my suitcase on the stand and set my purse on the table. Then I took the envelope out and laid it flat in front of me. For a while, I didn't open it. I just stood there, looking at it. For the first time in days, the silence felt different. Not empty, not heavy, just quiet. I took off my coat, folded it neatly over the chair, and sat down, slowly, deliberately. At 71, You learn that rushing rarely leads anywhere good. I opened the envelope again. The same documents. The same numbers. The same quiet truth, sitting between the lines. Full control. Primary holder. No shared access. I traced my finger lightly over the paper, not because I needed to read it again, but because I needed to feel it, make it real. Downstairs, somewhere in the distance, a door closed. Footsteps passed. Life continued. And for the first time since that dinner, I wasn't reacting. I was thinking. I reached for my phone and opened my contacts, scrolled, paused. Then I called Daniel again. He picked up on the second ring. "Margaret, I have a question." I said, "I assumed you would." He replied calmly. I almost smiled. "If I wanted to." "Limit access immediately." I said, "How quickly could that be done?" There was no hesitation today. Simple, direct. What would that involve? A series of authorizations, he said. Temporary restrictions first. Then we formalize any structural changes once you've decided long-term, temporary. I looked at the documents again, at the quiet system Noelle had built. They've already started planning renovations. I said, a pause. "I see," Daniel replied. "They think the house is theirs." I added, another pause. Longer this time. "And is it?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I thought about the title, the paperwork, the years Noelle and I had spent there. Then I spoke. "No," I said. The words settled into the room. Clear, final. "Then I suggest we proceed carefully," Daniel said. Not quickly, carefully. I leaned back in the chair. "They told me to leave." I said quietly, "I understand." "No," I added. "They told me I had nothing." This time, Daniel didn't respond immediately. "Then it would be wise," he said slowly, "to let them continue believing that for now. I looked out the window. A car pulled into the parking lot. A couple stepped out, laughing about something small, normal, unaware. "How long?" I asked. "That depends on what you want the outcome to be," he said. Outcome. I hadn't thought that far ahead. Not in detail, but I knew one thing. "I don't want a confrontation," I said. "Then don't create one," Daniel replied. His tone wasn't cold, just precise. "Control doesn't require noise," he added. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. That sounded like Noelle. "So, what do I do now?" I asked. There was a brief pause. "You observe," Daniel said. "You document, and when the time comes, you act. 3 steps, simple." I closed my eyes for a moment. Observe, document, act, not react. When I opened them again, the room felt smaller, more focused. "I'll send the initial documents within the hour," Daniel continued. "You'll just need to sign and return them. I'll be ready," I said. We ended the call shortly after. I placed the phone back on the table and sat there for a while. They thought I had left because I had no choice. They thought I was somewhere uncertain, struggling, trying to figure things out. In a way, they weren't entirely wrong, but not in the way they imagined. I stood up and walked over to the window. The parking lot lights had started to turn on, one by one. Soft, yellow, I rested my hand lightly against the glass. For years, I had lived inside a structure Noel built, a life he managed, a system he controlled. Now, that system was mine, and I hadn't even begun to use it yet. I turned back toward the table, toward the envelope, toward everything they didn't know. Then I picked up a pen, because the first step wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, it was a signature. And once I put my name on those papers, nothing in that house would belong to them the way they thought it did anymore. I signed the documents slowly, not because I was unsure, because I understood exactly what I was doing. The pen moved steadily across the paper. Margaret Henderson, the same name I had signed 1,000 times before on birthday cards, school forms, small checks at the grocery store. But this time, it meant something different. When I finished, I didn't rush. I placed the pen down neatly beside the papers, stacked everything carefully, and slid them back into the envelope. Control doesn't arrive all at once. It settles in, quietly. An hour later, I walked down to the front desk and asked the receptionist to send the documents through priority mail. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. By the time I returned to my room, it was already dark outside. The parking lot lights reflected faintly against the window. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't call anyone. Instead, I sat at the small desk and opened a notebook I had picked up earlier that day, plain black cover. Nothing personal about it. I wrote one word at the top of the first page: observe. Then I paused. For most of my life, I had been part of the center of things. Decisions were made around me. Conversations included me. Even when Noel handled the finances, I was still present. That had changed long before he passed. I could see that now. Small moments, subtle shifts. Wade checking his phone while I was speaking. Romy answering questions directed at me. Decisions being made in rooms I wasn't invited into. At the time, I let it pass. I told myself it was natural, that families evolve, that roles change. But sitting there in that quiet hotel room, pen in hand, I began to see it differently. It hadn't been sudden. It had been built piece by piece. I turned to the next page. Document. Underneath it, I started writing. Not emotions, not assumptions. Facts, dates, moments, words. I remembered clearly. She needs to be out in 2 weeks. The house is too much for you now. Make sure you don't take anything that belongs to the house. I wrote them exactly as they were said. No exaggeration, no interpretation, just truth. Then I added something else. The folder I had seen on the coffee table, the renovation plans, the heading, post-occupancy plan. I underlined that part once because it told me something important. This hadn't been a reaction. It had been a plan. I closed the notebook gently and rested my hand on top of it. For years, I had trusted that the people closest to me would act with consideration, not perfection, just basic respect. Now I understood something else. They hadn't expected resistance. They hadn't expected awareness. And they certainly hadn't expected preparation. My phone buzzed softly on the table. A message from Daniel. Documents received. Initial restrictions will be in place by morning. I read it once, then again, by morning. That was sooner than I expected. Not dramatic, not visible, but real. I placed the phone face down. Somewhere, in systems I couldn't see, things were already shifting. Access narrowing. Permissions changing. Doors closing quietly. I stood up and walked back to the window. The parking lot was almost empty now. Just a few cars scattered under dim lights. I thought about Wade, about Romy, right now. They were probably sitting in the kitchen, talking about paint colors, flooring options, timelines, confident, certain they believed the house was already theirs. I rested my hand lightly against the glass. By morning, that belief would start to crack. Not all at once, just small things. A delayed transaction, a denied request, a question that didn't have an easy answer, confusion. I turned away from the window and walked back to the desk. There was one more word I needed to write. I opened the notebook again, turned to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote, act. Then I stopped. Because action, I realized, didn't mean confrontation. It didn't mean raising my voice or forcing a moment. It meant timing, precision, clarity. I closed the notebook and placed it beside the envelope. Everything was in place. For now, I didn't need to do anything else. Not tonight. I turned off the light and lay down on the bed. The room fell into darkness. And for the first time in days, I slept because tomorrow they would begin to realize something wasn't working the way they expected. And they wouldn't understand why. Not yet. I woke up before my alarm. The room was still dim. The early morning light barely touching the edges of the curtains. For a moment, I didn't move. I just listened. Silence. Not the heavy kind I had felt in the house. Not the kind filled with absence. This silence felt controlled. I sat up slowly and reached for my phone. No missed calls. No messages from Wade that told me something. Whatever had changed overnight, they hadn't noticed it yet. I got dressed without rushing, simple clothes, neutral colors. The kind of outfit that doesn't draw attention. By the time I sat down with a cup of coffee, my phone buzzed. Daniel, restrictions are now active. Just one line. No explanation. No detail. He didn't need to explain. I read the message once, and then I placed the phone face down on the table. Somewhere, behind systems I couldn't see, something had shifted quietly. I took a sip of coffee, still too bitter. Then I picked up my notebook. Observe. That was still the first step. At 9:12 a.m., my phone rang. Wade. I let it ring twice before answering. Hello? Mom? His voice came quickly, tense. Did you do something with the accounts? Straight to the point. I didn't answer immediately. What do you mean? I asked calmly. There was a pause on the other end. The contractor just called. He said, the deposit didn't go through. Deposit. I said nothing. And I tried to move money from Dad's account this morning. He continued, it's blocked. Blocked. I leaned back slightly in my chair. I'm not sure what you're referring to. I said, that wasn't entirely untrue. Another pause. Longer this time. Mom, he said again, more carefully now, we need to handle this quickly. The renovation schedule. The renovation schedule? I repeated. He stopped. Yes, he said. We already discussed this. How did we? I looked out the window. The parking lot was filling up slowly. People arriving, going about their day. I don't recall agreeing to anything. I said that wasn't confrontational, just precise silence. Then a different voice came onto the line. Romy, Margaret. She said, her tone smoother than Wade's, but tighter underneath. There seems to be a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. I see, I said. The accounts we've been using for the house, she continued, something has changed. We just need you to fix it. Fix it. I let a small pause settle between us. I'm not aware of any issue that requires fixing, I said. Her tone sharpened slightly. Well, the bank says there are new restrictions, she said. And since everything was in Noelle's name, it isn't, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't interrupt harshly. I just said it. Another silence. What do you mean? She asked. I glanced down at the notebook on the table. Act. Not yet. It means, I said calmly, that things may not be exactly as you assumed. Wade came back onto the line. Mom, this isn't the time for confusion, he said. We need access to those funds. We need. I leaned back again. For what purpose? I asked. Another pause. For the house, he said. For the upgrades, for your plans. I said. He didn't respond, because that was the word. Plans. Not mine, not ours, theirs. Romy spoke again, more controlled now. We're trying to improve the property, she said. For everyone. For everyone. I looked around the hotel room, at the plain walls, the quiet space. I'm not living there anymore. I said, another silence. That's temporary, Wade said quickly. Was it? I see, I replied. There was something shifting in his tone now. Not anger, not yet, uncertainty. Mom, he said, softer this time. We just need you to call the bank and clear this up. Clear it up. I closed my eyes for a brief moment. For years, I had handled small things, appointments, schedules, details. Now they wanted me to handle this. The difference was, this time, I understood what I was handling. I'll review everything carefully, I said. Not yes, not no, just careful. That's not what I meant. Wade said, a hint of frustration slipping through. I know, I replied. Silence again. Then Romy spoke, her voice cooler now. We don't have time to delay this, she said. Time. I opened my eyes. Then you should consider adjusting your timeline, I said. That was the first time. The first moment I didn't just deflect. I set a boundary. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive, but it was clear. There was no immediate response, just breathing on the other end of the line. Then Wade spoke again. We'll talk about this when you get back, he said. Hey, back. I'll let you know when that is, I replied. And before either of them could say anything else, I ended the call. The room fell quiet again. I placed the phone on the table, not shaking, not rushed, just steady. Outside, the morning had fully arrived. People were moving. cars pulling in and out, life continuing. Inside, something else had begun. They had noticed. Not everything, but enough. Confusion, questions, a shift in control they couldn't see. I picked up my coffee and took another sip. Still bitter, but this time I didn't mind it. Because for the first time since that dinner, they weren't the ones deciding what happened next. I was. I didn't go back that day or the day after. Instead, I stayed exactly where I was, not hiding, not avoiding, waiting, because what Daniel said was right. Control doesn't need noise. It reveals itself when the other side starts to lose theirs. By the third day, the calls came earlier, more frequent. At 8:03 a.m., my phone rang. Wade. I answered this time without delay. Mom, he said, his voice tighter than before. We need to talk. We are talking, I replied. A pause. Not like this, he said. In person. In person. I looked at the notebook on the table. Act. Not yet. That may not be necessary. I said calmly. There was movement on his end. A door closing. A shift in tone. Mom, he said again. Slower. Now, things are getting complicated. Complicated. I didn't respond. I let him continue. The contractor pulled out. He said, the bank flagged multiple transactions, and we can't access anything tied to Dad's accounts. Anything. I leaned back slightly. I see. I said, that's it? He asked. Frustration slipping through. That's all you have to say? What did he expect? An apology? An explanation? I'm reviewing the situation? I said, that answer didn't satisfy him. Reviewing? He repeated, Mom, this isn't paperwork. This is the house. This is our plan. Our plan. I let the silence stretch just long enough. I don't recall being part of that plan. I said, that landed. He didn't respond right away. Then, quietly, you live here. Present tense. Interesting. I lived there. I corrected. Another pause. That's not what I meant. He said quickly, you're just staying somewhere else temporarily. Temporarily. I didn't challenge it. Instead, I asked a question. When did you decide to renovate the house? I said. He hesitated. We talked about it. He replied. When? I asked. Silence. Because there wasn't a moment. There was no conversation. No agreement. Only assumption. Romy's voice entered the call again. More controlled than before, but sharper. This back and forth isn't productive, she said. We need clarity. Clarity. I stood up and walked slowly toward the window. What kind of clarity are you looking for? I asked. A brief pause. Whether you're going to cooperate, she said. Cooperate. The word sat between us. I am cooperating, I said. That wasn't the answer she wanted. No, you're delaying, she replied. I didn't argue. Because from her perspective, that was true. I'm making sure I understand everything before making decisions. I said. There was a shift in her tone. Less patience. More edge. There's nothing to understand, she said. The house needs work. We're handling it. We. I turned slightly, looking at my reflection in the window. On what authority? I asked. That stopped her. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. Wade spoke again, more defensive now. Mom, this is ridiculous, he said. It's Dad's house. It's always been Dad's house. Was it? I let the question sit. Then I answered. It was ours. I said, not louder, not sharper, just accurate. Another silence. Longer this time. Then Romy spoke. Slower now. More careful. What exactly are you saying? She asked. I walked back to the table, picked up the envelope, held it in my hand. I'm saying, I replied, that you may not have the full picture. That was the closest I had come so far, not revealing, not explaining, just shifting the ground beneath them. Wade exhaled sharply. Then explain it to us, he said. I didn't answer immediately, because that was the moment, the one where everything could turn. Too early, and they would push back. Too late, and they would start digging on their own. Timing mattered. We can discuss it. I said finally. When? Romy asked quickly. I glanced at the clock. Tomorrow, I said. At the house. There was a pause. They hadn't expected that. You're coming back? Wade asked. Yes. Simple, direct, another silence. Then Romy spoke, her tone carefully neutral. Fine, she said. Tomorrow. The call ended shortly after. I placed the phone down slowly. Tomorrow. That word carried weight. Not because of what I would say, but because of what I wouldn't. I opened the notebook again. Under act, I added one line, choose the moment. Then I closed it. Outside, the afternoon light had softened. Inside, everything was already in motion. They thought tomorrow would be a conversation. They thought they would get answers. What they didn't realize was tomorrow wasn't about answering their questions. It was about showing them they had been asking the wrong ones all along. I arrived at the house 10 minutes early. Old habits. The driveway looked the same. Clean, quiet, familiar. But something about it felt different. Not the house, not the structure, just the understanding of it. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, hands resting lightly on the wheel, breathing steady. This wasn't about emotion. Not anymore. It was about clarity. I picked up my purse. The envelope was inside, neatly placed, exactly where it should be. Then I stepped out of the car. The front door was unlocked. Of course it was. I walked in without knocking. Voices from the kitchen. Low, tense. They stopped the moment I entered. Wade stood near the counter, Romy beside him. Both of them turned. For a brief second, no one spoke. Then Wade cleared his throat. You're here, he said. I nodded once. Yes. Romy didn't smile. Let's sit, she said. Not an invitation, more like a direction. I walked to the dining table. The same one. The same chairs. The same place where she told me to leave. I took a seat. They sat across from me. There was no small talk, no polite pause. Wade leaned forward slightly. Mom, We need to understand what's going on, he said. Understand. I placed my hands calmly on the table. What exactly would you like to understand? I asked. Romy exchanged a quick glance with him. The accounts, she said. The restrictions. The bank won't release anything. I nodded slightly. That's correct, I said. Wade frowned. Then fix it, he said. Simple, direct, like it was still his to manage. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I reached into my purse, took out the envelope, placed it gently on the table between us. Neither of them moved. What is that? Wade asked. Information? I said. Romy leaned forward slightly. Then, explain it, she said. I opened the envelope. Slowly. Not to create tension. Just not rushing. I took out a single document, placed it in front of them. This, I said, is the trust. They looked down, scanning. Confusion came first, then something else. What is this? Wade asked. It's a legal structure your father set up, I replied. Romy's eyes moved faster now, more focused. Why is your name on this? She asked. I looked at her. Because it belongs to me, I said. That was the first shift. Not loud, not dramatic, but real. Wade sat back slightly. That doesn't make sense, he said. Dad handled everything. Yes, I said. He did. I let that sit for a moment, and this is part of what he handled. Silence. Romy flipped through the pages. Faster now. There are multiple accounts here, she said. These balances, she stopped, because she saw it. The numbers. What does this mean? Wade asked. It means, I said calmly, that the financial structure of this house is not what you assumed. Another silence. Heavier this time. Wade looked at me. Really looked this time. How you're saying this is yours? He asked. I didn't rush the answer. Yes. Simple. Final. Romy straightened slightly. That's not possible, she said. The house is in Noel's name. I reached into the envelope again. Another document. Placed it beside the first. Was, I said. She looked down. Her expression changed. Not confusion, this time. Recognition. Slow. Uncomfortable. Wade leaned forward again. What is that? He asked. Transfer documentation? I said. He stared at it. You're telling me he started, then stopped, 'cause he didn't know how to finish that sentence. I helped him. I'm telling you, I said that your father made sure everything was arranged long before this conversation. Romy's voice came out tighter now. Why would he do that? She asked. I met her gaze. For the same reason we're sitting here now. I said. That landed. Wade looked between us. This doesn't change anything, he said quickly. We're still living here. You're staying there. I corrected. Not harsh, not raised, just accurate. Another pause. This is our home, he said. I looked at him for a moment. Then I asked one question. On what basis? Silence. Because now, he didn't have an answer. Romy spoke again, but slower this time. More careful. What are you planning to do? She asked. Planning. I folded my hands lightly on the table. I haven't decided yet. I said, That wasn't what they expected. You haven't decided? Wade repeated. No, I said. I let that settle because, for the first time, I continued. I'm in a position where I don't have to rush. That was the second shift, the one they felt. Romy leaned back slightly. This is unnecessary, she said. We can resolve this easily. Easily. I almost smiled. I agree, I said. That caught her off guard. Then let's do that, she said quickly. I nodded once. We will, I said. Then I stood up. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just finished. Wade looked up. That's it? He asked. For now, I replied. I picked up the documents, placed them back into the envelope. You'll hear from me soon, I said. Romy opened her mouth to respond, but didn't, because there was nothing immediate to push against. No argument, no emotion, just control. I walked to the door, opened it, and stepped outside. Behind me, the house was still there, unchanged, but everything inside it was no longer what they thought it was. I didn't drive far after leaving the house. Just far enough. There's a quiet that follows certain moments. Not relief, not regret, just distance. I pulled into a small parking area near the edge of town and turned off the engine. The envelope rested on the passenger seat. Still closed, still controlled. Inside the house, they were probably still sitting at that table, looking at each other, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Not the documents, not the numbers, the shift. For days, they had been certain, confident. Now they weren't. My phone buzzed. Wade. I let it ring, once, twice. Then I answered. Mom, he said, his voice different now, slower, careful. We need to talk about this properly. We already did. I said, no, he replied quickly. That wasn't a real conversation. I looked out through the windshield. Cars passing, people moving, life continuing. It was enough, I said. A pause. Mom, he said again. Softer now. I didn't know. There it was. Not an apology. Not exactly, but close. I believe you, I said. Because I did. He hadn't known. That didn't change what he did with what he thought he knew. We weren't trying to. He started, then stopped. I didn't help him finish that sentence. Because whatever words he chose, they wouldn't change the facts. Romy's voice came on the line. We need to find a solution, she said. Solution. I agree, I said. That seemed to steady her. Then let's be reasonable, she continued. You don't want to manage a property like that on your own. It makes more sense for us to handle it. Handle it. The same word, different tone. I rested my hand lightly on the steering wheel. What exactly are you suggesting? I asked. A pause. Then, that things stay the way they are. She said, we live there. We take care of everything. And you don't have to worry. You don't have to worry. I almost smiled. Because for years, that's exactly what I had done. Trusted someone else to handle things. And now, here we were. I see. I said. Wade spoke again. Mom, We can make this easy, he said. You don't even have to come back. We'll take care of the house. The expenses, everything. I let that word settle. Everything except ownership, I said. Silence. Then Romy again. That's just paperwork, she said. Paperwork. I glanced at the envelope beside me. No, I said. It isn't. Her tone sharpened. Margaret, this doesn't have to become complicated, she said. Become. As if it hadn't already. It already is, I replied. Another pause, longer this time. Wade exhaled slowly. What do you want? He asked. That was the right question, but it came late. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I thought about the past week, the dinner, the words, the certainty in their voices. Pack your bags and leave. I looked down at my hands, steady, then I spoke. I want time, I said. That wasn't what they expected. Time, Wade repeated. Yes. For what? Romy asked. To decide. I said, silence. Because that changed everything. They were no longer in control of the timeline. I don't understand why this needs to take time, she said. I didn't respond right away, because the answer wasn't complicated. It just wasn't comfortable, because for the first time, I said calmly, I'm the one making the decision. That was it. No raised voice, no anger, just truth. Wade didn't speak. Romy didn't interrupt. There was nothing immediate to push against. We'll wait, Wade said finally. Not confident, not certain, just accepting. For now, I replied. I ended the call. The car was quiet again. I leaned back in the seat and closed my eyes for a moment. Not tired, not overwhelmed, just still. For years, I had moved within decisions made by others, adjusted, adapted. Everything had shifted, not loudly, not suddenly, but completely. I opened my eyes and looked at the envelope. They thought this was about the house. It wasn't. They thought this was about money. It wasn't. It was about something much simpler, position. And for the first time in a long time, I was no longer standing where they had placed me. I was standing where I chose to be. I didn't go back to the house the next day or the day after that. Time has a way of settling things, not fixing them, not erasing them, just revealing them. A week passed, then another. The calls became less frequent, shorter, more careful. Wade stopped asking me to fix things. Romy stopped using the word we when she talked about the house. Something had shifted, not just in the accounts, in them. I met Daniel again at his office on a quiet Thursday morning. He had everything prepared. Documents, options, clear paths forward. You've had time to consider, he said. I nodded. Yes. He didn't rush me. He didn't push. That's what I appreciated about him. Control doesn't need pressure. I'd like to finalize the structure, I said. He listened carefully. I want the house secured under my name fully, I continued. No ambiguity. He nodded. That can be done. And the trust, I added. I want it to remain exactly as Noel designed it. A small pause. Then, that's a wise decision, he said. Maybe it was. Or maybe it was just respect for the man who had seen something I hadn't. We signed everything that day. Not dramatically, not ceremoniously, just finished. After that, I drove back to the house one last time. Not to stay, to close something. The driveway was the same. The door still unlocked. Inside, it felt different. Not because of what had changed, because of what I now understood. Wade was in the living room when I walked in. He stood up immediately. "Mom," he said, "no tension this time, no urgency, just uncertainty." Romy stood behind him, quiet, watching. "I'm here to talk," I said. We sat in the same room, different chairs this time. I placed a single folder on the table. "Everything has been finalized." I said, "Wade didn't reach for it." "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means the house is legally secured." I said, "In my name." Silence. "And the rest?" Romy asked. "The rest," I said, "remains exactly where it belongs." She understood. I could see it. Wade looked down, then back at me. "So what happens now?" he asked. That question again. But this time, it was different. Not demanding. Asking. I took a breath. Not heavy, not emotional, just steady. "You'll have time to make arrangements," I said. Wade blinked. "Arrangements?" he repeated. "Yes, I let that settle. I won't rush you," I continued. "But you will need to find another place." There it was. Not revenge, not punishment, just consequence. Romy didn't speak. Wade did. "Mom?" He started. I raised my hand slightly, not to silence him, just to finish. "I'm not doing this out of anger," I said. And I wasn't. "I'm doing this because this house was built on something that no longer exists." He didn't argue, because he knew the moment at that dinner, the words, the decision they thought was already made. "I understand," he said quietly. And maybe he did. Maybe not fully, but enough. I stood up. This time, there was no hesitation. No pause at the door. No looking back. Because there was nothing left behind that still belonged to me. Not the house. Not the role I used to have. Only the choice I had made. Outside, the air felt different, lighter. Not because something had been taken back, but because something had been returned to me. A few months later, I moved into a smaller home. Not grand, not filled with history, but quiet, mine. I arranged things the way I wanted, took my time. There was no one to impress, no one to accommodate. Just space and peace. Sometimes, in the evenings, I sit by the window with a cup of tea, the same way I used to. But it feels different now, not because I lost something, but because I finally understood what I had. They thought I was alone. They thought I was dependent. They thought I would leave with nothing. They were wrong. I didn't need to fight. I didn't need to argue. I just needed to understand. And once I did, everything else followed. Because in the end, I didn't just walk away from that house. I walked back into myself.